What's causing Sarah to go from this to this? Find out next on True Yet Untrue Tales. But before we start, don't forget to like and subscribe. Okay, let's get on with the show. It was well past midnight on a cold Tuesday, and a college student, we'll call her Sarah, was sitting on a nearly empty subway car heading home after a long night at the library. The car was quiet, save for the rhythmic rattling of the train through the dark, echoing tunnels. Sarah was exhausted, just leaning her head back and closing her eyes, trying to endure the last leg of her commute. But as the train lurched forward, Sarah opened her eyes and realized she was being watched. Sitting directly across the aisle from her were 3 passengers. It was a middle-aged woman sandwiched tightly between 2 older men. At first, it looked like a perfectly normal group of commuters, but as Sarah looked closer, her heart dropped into her stomach. The woman across from her was staring. And she wasn't just glancing. She was staring with a fixed, wide-eyed, unblinking intensity that seemed to pierce right through Sarah. Her eyes were huge, and they never once flickered or looked away. Sarah felt a wave of absolute, vicious dread wash over her. She tried to distract herself by looking at her phone. Then she tried looking at the blurry advertisements on the wall, but every time she glanced back, those eyes were still locked onto her. What made it even more distressing was the 2 men sitting on either side of the woman. They didn't move an inch. They just sat there, stone-faced and rigid, staring straight ahead as if they didn't even notice the woman's terrifying behavior. It was like they were completely indifferent to the absolute chaos of the situation. At the next stop, the doors hissed open, and a tall man wearing a gray trench coat stepped onto the car. He looked around the empty car and for some reason chose to sit down right next to Sarah. Sarah felt a momentary surge of relief having someone else nearby. But the woman across the aisle didn't even acknowledge the new passenger's arrival. She just kept that horrifying gaze fixed on Sarah, and the 2 men beside her remained completely motionless. For the next 10 minutes, Sarah sat there, paralyzed by fear. She felt like she was caught in a trap, and her brain simply couldn't compute why no one was saying anything. She was breathing in short, shallow gasps, her mind racing with questions about who these people were and what they wanted. As the train began to slow down for the next station, the man in the trench coat suddenly stood up. But instead of walking toward the doors, he reached out, clamped his hand onto Sarah's arm with a grip like iron, and hauled her off her seat. Sarah was in a state of total panic, trying to pull away and screaming for help, as the man literally dragged her out onto the platform just as the doors slammed shut behind them. The train began to pull away, and Sarah spun around, ready to fight for her life, her voice cracking as she shouted at the man. She was terrified, thinking she'd been kidnapped in broad daylight, but the man just looked at her and held up his hands to show he wasn't a threat. He looked Sarah in the eye and said, "Calm down. I just saved your life." Sarah was still shaking, her heart pounding against her ribs. The man continued, "I didn't mean to scare you, but I had to get you off that train immediately. I'm a doctor. I was looking at that woman sitting across from you, and I realized she wasn't staring. She was dead. Those 2 men on either side of her, they were propping her up to make it look like she was just another passenger.